Well, I am a sucker for a really good visualization of a statistic. And we've got a treat for you. Visual Capitalist, a little over a year ago, compared the world's largest tech companies, their market capitalization, to the GDP, the gross domestic product of countries around the world. And what did we find? Well, we found a company like Apple would be considered with the G7. Today's guest, Paul Druckman, is going to provide a vast perspective on companies as global economies, as well as the role and a twist to what we might find for CFOs. He even has a new name for them that you'll get to uncover. So today, Paul Druckman joins us from London. He is a world leader, former CFO, executive chairman of the World Benchmarking Alliance, as well as engaged with accounting for sustainability. He understands the collide of finance and non-financial coming together to make an impact for both business and society. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mandy.
So this idea that we opened the show up with, talking about companies as economies, came from a conversation that you and I had together, and I really appreciated that perspective as the world tries to tackle sustainability and finance. So what can we understand and learn as companies should be considered economies in change and moving forward in the world?
A very interesting idea, and I loved your quote about Apple and where they're going. In fact, a few years ago, I used this is in 2017, there was an NGO called Global Justice, and they ranked the largest 100 entities in the world, and they did it by company revenue in terms of how they organised it, and 69 out of the top 100 in that list of countries and companies were companies. So it sort of reinforces what you said. And in fact, when you went outside the top 100 and when it looked at the top 200, it was 3/4, 157 of them were corporations.
Unbelievable.
So it just shows that what an impact companies have in our world, and we don't recognise it.
What do you think that does when we talk about these large global challenges as it relates to environment, social, and governance? What is their responsibility if they're truly like some of the world's global economies?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a survey done by Edelman, the media company, a huge survey that's done every year in time for the World Economic Forum, and in their findings, the only trusted institution, so that's governments and all the other media and et cetera, the only trusted institution is business. So that's in terms of people, and they talk about informed and uninformed. It's business that's trusted, and with that fact in mind, we have to recognise also that business is probably the only international and global reach than the companies. Than the countries. As you can appreciate, looking at G20 talks and the talks at COP27 in Egypt, there is so much diversity of opinion, country by country or region by region. Companies actually do have that global reach.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing these spaces become to collide a little bit more, right? When you look at COP, when you look at Davos, we're starting to see that interconnectivity of business and government and partnerships coming together, because not one sector can solve all of these global challenges we have to face in the next 10 years. And that led to a lot of your work around the World Benchmarking Alliance. Tell us a little bit about what it is and what the work is you're doing as chairman.
So, in essence, what we've done is we've created a methodology for ranking and measuring the largest 2,000 emitters in the world against the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so it's not value creation. It's nothing to do with business as a whole. It's more business's impacts on people and the planet. And we've done that in creating 7 system transformations that need to be done and allocated these 2,000 major corporations across the world to a particular system or more than one. And we are, during 2023, we will have finished the benchmarks. But in essence, what we're doing is saying, that Apple, if in the technology sector, you could actually look up and see where does Apple rank, right? And if you want to look in other sectors, you can actually see where people rank or globally against each other across sectors. So that is what we're doing. And all of this is free and transparent for the use for public interest.
As you mentioned about COP and World Economic Forum, some of the big discussions coming out of those gatherings of private and public partnerships is really looking at this idea of how do we think about the long term and yet stay disciplined and profitable in the short term. As a former executive and chairman and someone who's very close to the financial perspective, how should companies be thinking about this as the narrative around it is we need to stay disciplined, we need to think about the balance of both and answer these tough questions? So Paul, answer the tough question. What should they do?
What should they do? Well, at one extreme, Mandy, you should look at what happened very recently with Patagonia. So their founder announced that he was giving his brand away to a charitable trust. And in an open letter, he actually explained that instead of going public, this is quoting from him, instead of going public, you could say we're going purpose. Instead of extracting value from nature and transforming it into wealth for investors, we'll use the wealth Patagonia creates to protect the source of all wealth. So I think, that is quite extreme, but it is, important. If in time for COP26 in Glasgow last November, Paul Polman and a colleague produced a book which was called Net Positive, right? Whereas we're looking for companies to be net zero, what he was saying is that's no good. We actually need corporations to be net positive. And where ESG and how it's thought about concerns me is in 2 ways, Mandy. The first is there is no accountability mechanism for the impact that corporations have on people and the planet. Right? There's an accountability mechanism for how it impacts their value and how they create value through balance sheets and profit and loss accounts, etc. But there isn't really one that brings it all together and creates an accountability mechanism. Going back to the World Benchmarking Alliance, that's exactly what we do. Okay, because we're actually saying you have scored X against 100 or whatever it happens to be. So that's number one. In terms of that, the other key problem that I have with the ESG world is that it is assumed that it'll all come out in the wash in the long term by using the phrase in the long term. So in other words, what corporations do in the short term almost, I'm exaggerating, but almost doesn't matter. Because in the long term, it'll come out okay because sustainability of the business and sustainability of the planet have a common theme at the end.
I appreciate that. And I think an alternative perspective for me is I look at, we have to bring everybody to the table. And oftentimes when we over penalize companies, we talked a little bit about this as we looked back last season on AGM season about do you penalize or do you reward? And I think some of the research is starting to look at that notion with Dan Lambeth around what's the reward and does a reward move a company forward faster? And I think that's a piece over the next year to 18 months that we're going to see in the market play out. And I love that we're offering 2 different perspectives to our listeners. I think it's a healthy dialogue to have because it's a dialogue that's happening right now in the market. As we think ahead to handling this idea of human and financial capital, what do you think is most important for boards to think about with ESG plus revenue or ESG plus risk?
I would actually slightly rephrase, if I could, and rather than talking about ESG in that sense, I would actually use the word resilience rather than risk. So because resilience is a financial measure. You know, I was I still am a chairman of an insurance company here in the UK. And I say I still am because it's got about another 2 days and we're sold and I'm out. But you know, through the pandemic and the lockdown here in the UK, we actually did extremely well because it's a very resilient business. People need insurance one way or another. And so to me, there are risks, but there's the fact the risks are contained within that term resilience. But resilience means a lot more. So to me, revenue is a driving force of a dated market. Yes, but if you can create a organisation that has resilience alongside their ESG work, that is the organisation of the future.
Paul, from all your benchmarking work around the world, tell us, what have leaders done well?
Yeah, thank you. Because I mean, it's important to recognise that there are leaders who are demonstrating how things can be done. I'll just give you 2 quick examples. In the digital inclusion benchmark, which is around technology companies, Telefonica and Orange score really highly in the benchmark, and it just shows that the others, the majority, are scoring well below 50, whereas Telefonica were at 89.5 out of 100. So it's a question of case studies and demonstration that can be done. And if you look at the electric utilities, which is very topical here in Europe at the moment with the problems in Ukraine and with Russia, we in our benchmark there, Ørsted, the Norwegian company, scored 96.4 out of 100, and SSE in the UK 84.3. Really demonstrating how leaders can do it. And yet 36 of the companies, that's 36, over 70% of the 50 companies scored below 50.
What I appreciate about those examples in a previous show with Shi-Young Kim, we talked about going into your ESG superpower. And those examples illustrate, whether you're an electric company or you're a technology company, when you play into your superpower, you can truly make not only a business impact, but a societal impact that can move us all forward towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And benchmarking and transparency with the work you're doing is going to lead the way. So, Paul, as we think about moving forward, what is a practical advice? And I'm going to get real specific here. What's practical advice that you have for a CFO?
Okay, number 1, again, being radical, Mandy. I would change your name to a CVO.
Oh, tell me more about this, a new acronym.
Chief Value Officer. So you're not focused on financials, and it isn't just a financials department. Because I think the CFO needs to understand that they have a significant role in creating the information for the rest of the business to truly be able to embed the ESG into how not just their strategy, but their execution and processes. So I think that would be a silly, perhaps, example, but nonetheless, it's amazing how something like that could make a difference. I think the other thing I would do is start real education programs at the top. Start at the top and the bottom. So in other words, start at the 2 extremes and work your way through, so that there is a clear understanding that this isn't just people, gluing themselves to a motorway, but perhaps that's not the best place to go. But nonetheless, we are in a scenario where knowledge is power, and knowledge is about education. And, educating the non-execs at one extreme and the senior management team, and educating those that are coming into the business at the other extreme, I think would be incredibly effective. And just drumming the beat for Workiva, even in KPMG did their 2022 survey of sustainability reports, very, very significant survey, biannual survey. And one of their key trends and tangible ways businesses can deal with it, and I'll read it out, it says, consider investing in quality non-financial data management. And the likes of organisations like your own, Mandi, that are coming into this space will make the CFO much more effective and efficient.
Well, I appreciate the new acronym, the CVO, Chief Value Officer.
I've borrowed it from Professor Mervyn King in South Africa.
There you go.
He
Some of
wrote
the
a book
best
about it.
ideas and compliments are the borrowed quotes that we have. That's true. So true. Well, thank you, Paul, so much for thinking big, for offering an alternative perspective and dialoguing on the real issues that are tackling companies around the world, as you said, who have the power of some of the world's largest global economies. And only together can we move forward. As we consider season 2 for ESG Talk, you're going to hear more about various perspectives on challenging topics. Because when we hear different perspectives, we can come together and move forward on common ground to tackle these issues for both business and society. We will talk real soon.